If you've been looking for your next camera, I want you to know you're not alone. While I have limited interest in the A-mount SLR or DSLRs, thought of single lens translucent cameras keep me up at night. Sony only released 12 SLTs between 2010 and 2016. I was expecting them to sell for a premium compared to Canon EF and Nikon F DSLRs, but the opposite is actually true. They're generally cheaper, with the sole exception being the A99 II. So it's nice that we're not in a 4/3 or Pentax Q situation where the cameras are not only hard to find but expensive. The 12 different models are easy to narrow down, as 7 of them have a proprietary flash shoe, 2 of them have plastic lens mounts, and only 2 are full frame. I bet you can guess which 2 are the most expensive. Before I go through all the cameras, I'm going to explain what makes the SLT tech so special, and quickly explain why Sony was using the Minolta A-mount on these cameras. I'll link Wikipedia, but the SLT cameras use a pellicle mirror to split the light that enters the camera. Some of the light gets sent up to phase detection autofocus points. Those are where you would have expected an optical viewfinder to be. The rest of the light passes through to the sensor. SLTs are similar to mirrorless cameras because they also use electronic viewfinders. When they were first released, the competition, like the Sony NEX3, Olympus EPL1, and Panasonic GF1, used contrast detection for autofocus. It wasn't good then, and it's still not good now, though SLTs no longer have that benefit, as phase detection autofocus points are now built onto camera sensors. Mirrorless is superior because there are fewer parts. Sony discontinued the last of the cameras in 2021, and with it the A-mount, which was of course first released by Minolta in 1985. I will be covering what I believe are all 42 of the A-mount lenses in a different video. What's important for you to know is that lenses start around $50. So you don't need to worry about a camera being sold without a lens. There are a few inexpensive options out there for you to choose from. Sony ended up with the A-mount because Minolta had to recall almost all of their first generation of cameras. The Maxim 7D and 5D, released in 2004 and 2005, had a defect known as the first black frame problem. When this problem first showed up, the first frame taken when the camera was turned on would be black. Unfortunately, the problem would get worse over time until all frames captured would be black, and that's why Minolta doesn't make cameras anymore. The recall was expensive and destroyed Minolta's market share. In January of 2006, the camera division was sold to Sony. I have to imagine that was one wild ride, being excited about the launch of the first DSLRs to being dumped on Sony in less than 2 years. They were like the Cybertrucks of cameras. I'd feel bad about the A-mount being dead, but this is the company that came up with removing features and selling them as creative expansion cards, as well as using a proprietary flash shoe. The intelligent iISO flash shoe is the trash on 7 of the cameras. Minolta released it in 1988, the same year as the creative expansion cards. So if you ever had any doubt, companies were being just as anti-consumer in the 80s as they are now. Personally, a usable hot shoe is just about a must-have feature on any camera that I intend to use for photography. Sony loves proprietary memory formats, so it would make sense why they would want Minolta. I think the real reason was probably patents, but all the cards can use Memory Stick Pro Duo cards in addition to SD-XC memory cards. Much like Betamax and Minidisc, it was a cash grab for Sony. SD cards are cheaper, more widely available, faster, and used in more devices. For instance, have you ever seen a laptop with a built-in memory card reader? I think they finally phased out compatibility on their latest cameras and in the other devices that used them. There's no reason to use a Pro Duo card in any of these cameras. Go with an SD card instead, unless you get one included with a camera. Any SD card that is 2 terabytes or smaller with UHS 1 will be good enough. I'm going to start with the entry-level APS-C cameras. And surprisingly enough, I would buy some of these if they were cheap enough where I could immediately resell them for a profit. I mean, like, come on. You're watching this video, I bet you don't overpay for entry-level cameras. Well, none of them are bad. If you're looking for value, my recommendation is the Nikon D3200. But again, we're here for fun, so let's ignore that. With that in mind, I think I would still go for a higher end body. There's nothing magical about using a cheap first generation electronic viewfinder. I don't want to hear anything about the subtle transitory gradient due to the pellicle mirror and the greens and Sony's color science making it such a film-like image. You're going to have to come up with something more ridiculous than that. The A33 was released in 2010. It, like all of the SLTs, uses a CMOS sensor. In this case, it's 14.2 megapixels, 15 autofocus points, 7 frames per second continuous shooting, an expandable iISO up to 25,600 is impressive on paper. However, the 4x3 LCD has a 1.44 million dot resolution, but you're getting less than that because it's used to display a 16:9 image. In metric, that's a resolution of 800 by 600, with 800 by 480 being used to display an image, and it has a 60 Hz refresh rate. Remember, these are first generation EVFs, and they have gotten much better since then. The 3-inch display on the A33 has a 640 by 480 resolution. That's the same as my ZV-1 that I am using to record this, and it's perfectly fine. It is going to have problems in sunlight as it is a 15-year-old LCD panel. You need to have realistic expectations. The screen flops down and can twist around so you can record yourself in glorious high-definition video. Unless, of course, you want to use a tripod while you're doing that. The next year, Sony released the A35. They fixed the problem of the floppy screen getting blocked by the tripod by fixing it in place. 2 more megapixels were added, but it can only shoot 5.5 frames per second compared to the 7 on the A33. The screen and the EVF are the same. The changes were made so it could come in at a lower price. This was right around the peak of digital camera sales, and competition was definitely fierce. The series is then capped off with the A37 released in 2012. It's a cheaper version of the A35. A welcome change is that it has a proper tilt screen, but it is a 2.6-inch screen with a resolution of 320 by 240. That screen design is going to be the most useful for photography, but I think you're still left with an underwhelming camera compared to higher end models. If you're planning to use any of these cameras for more than just a few days of fun shooting, I would recommend going with something with a better EVF. The upper entry-level models start with the 16.2 megapixel A55. It was a 2010 release. It features 15 autofocus points and the ability to shoot at 9 frames per second continuous. The EVF and floppy screen are the same as the A33 and the upcoming A57. If you want to get one for really cheap, look at winning an auction on eBay. Their competition would have been the Canon T3i or 600D and the Nikon D5100. Which one would you pick? I think I would go with the T3i, but the real standout around that time would be the Nikon D5200. The A57 was released in 2012. It can shoot 10 frames per second, but the image buffer is smaller than what's in the A55. The difference being 25 JPEGs versus 32. It's also a different 16.1 megapixel sensor, so you should get better low light performance. Assuming that you don't have a hoarding problem, you could keep them for 3 to 6 months and then resell and break even. That way you're left with memories instead of a dust collector. The series ends with the release of the A58 in 2013. It sees an upgrade to a 1.44 million dot OLED EVF. It has a normal tilt screen, which is my preference for photography. It's the first model with a standard hot shoe, and they were sold until 2017, so they are easy to find. That should make it better than all of the previous models, but it has a plastic lens mount. Its competition would have been the Nikon D5200 and Canon T5i. I feel like the plastic lens mount is an admission that they did not expect the camera to get used. The goal was to hit a price point and drive sales, which I actually think is correct because all of these cameras, with the exception of the A99 II, can easily be found with very low shutter counts. That's a dirty little secret of the camera industry. The majority of cameras barely get used. If you don't care about flash, the A65 from 2011 is where the best tech starts to show up. In this case, it's going to be the half-inch 2.36 million dot OLED EVF, 15 autofocus points, 24.3 megapixels, the floppy screen, and unfortunately the abomination of a flash shoe on top. Am I crazy to be side-eyeing those features? Just like the previous series, the A68 closes it out in 2016 with another plastic lens mount. That seems like such a petty place to cut costs, but it was sold until 2020. Or that could have been how long it took to sell all of them, because there aren't very many out there. The EVF got neutered to the 1.44 million dot OLED, though on a positive note it has 79 autofocus points, a tilt screen, and a standard hot shoe. I find the product segmentation choices to be so strange. I'm not sure if the EVF was one of the more expensive parts or people were just using the screen so much more. I wonder if the plastic lens mounts are because people weren't using their cameras, so of course they're not going to buy additional lenses for them. My assumption is that everyone just stuck with the kit lens or lenses that their camera came with, whereas the average full-frame camera owner probably ends up buying at least a couple more lenses. In 2011, the A77 was the best SLT Sony offered. It has the 2.36 million dot OLED EVF that is going to be used on the rest of the models in this video, though the magnification is different because it's an APS-C sensor compared to the full-frame models. The EVF was also used in the A7, A7 II, and A7 III, so you might already have experience with it. What are people's thoughts on it? I had an OG A7 for a while, and one of the things I did not like about that camera was the EVF. Additional specs of note are the 19 autofocus points, 24.3 megapixels, and proper tilt screen. The big downside is the flash shoe. For $350, I think I would rather have a Nikon D7100 or a Canon 7D Mark II. Finally, the A77 II has good specs and a normal hot shoe. It has an overly complex flippy-flappy screen that can rotate and be seen above the top of the camera. That's nice unless you want to use a mic or other accessory in the hot shoe. I like my Zoom F2 Bluetooth enough at least to not think about replacing it the majority of the times I use it. So this is the first camera that starts to appeal to me. It can record 1080p 60 video, but I believe there are some cropping shenanigans going on having to do with the Sony Steady Shot, which is electronic stabilization. Before the SLTs, Sony released two full-frame DSLRs, the A900 in 2008, and then the A850 in 2009. It had a slightly smaller viewfinder, a slower continuous shooting speed, and some other minor changes. The important thing to note is that the sensor is the same between them. The full-frame A99 was released in 2012. It has a normal hot shoe and the same fancy screen from the A77 II. 24.3 megapixels and 19 autofocus points. It was released against the Nikon D800 and the Canon 5D Mark III. The Nikon D750 wasn't released until 2014. Cannibalization might have come from the Sony NEX7, but that's an APS-C camera, so I'm not sure if it counts as competition. The A7 and A7R would be released in 2013. The A99 II is the way tech and a lens mount should be ended. It has a 42.4 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor with IBIS. I think that might be the same sensor that is used in the A7R3. It can shoot 12 frames per second onto dual SDXC UHS-1 card slots. It was released at the end of 2016, 9 to 10 months before the Nikon D850. Both the 5D Mark IV and 5DS were released before it. On the E-mount, the A9 was released in 2017, and the A7R3 shortly after that. You can definitely tell there are die-hard users out there due to the prices on these things. I was not expecting them to be that expensive. So after going through all 12 of the cameras, I don't think that I would own any of them long term if they had the proprietary flash shoe. But of the cameras that are afflicted with that, I think the A65 would be the one I would go for. The A77 II doesn't do anything for me because I don't want to deal with the crop. I want the rendering of the old Minolta lenses. They've got a great 1980s look, and so for that reason, I think I would go with the A99. The A99 II is just too expensive compared to the Canon 5DS. The difference in price is basically an 85 1.2L or 135mm f2L and a 50 1.2L. It's just, I don't think I could justify that. But let me know which cameras you would pick and if there is anything I messed up on. Thanks for watching and happy shooting.